let's start on a new topic. Here's the topic.
Sure.
Okay, so one of the things is there's the ability to have your own My Cloud, like from Western Digital, and there's other people that have clouds where you go out into their cloud, and there's other people that have local hard drives you can put in. I like the Western Digital one personally, and by the way, I don't get paid from them for a nickel for anything I say nice about them. So that's a full disclosure, at least at this point in time. I'd love them to throw money at me, but they don't. So anyway, what you have is the ability to put in your house essentially what's called an NAS server, and it's a network access storage.
Network attached storage, right?
Network attached, network access, network, whatever you want to call it, storage. And it's sitting there inside your it's a shared folder. And it turns out that you can get with the new high speed networks, you can get as much speed to that device as you can to the device on your own computer. And in fact, it can even be faster. And so what happens is that network attached storage is a wonderful way to share all the files in your home network, so that no matter which computer you're on, you just attach that and then connect it. Now, one of the problems with that is what we've seen with doing our video, where all of a sudden one of us slows down, it all kind of starts getting choppy, is somebody else in the house, say, watching a movie, and so they're eating up my bandwidth. So then my network attached storage is slow simply because I can't get at the network. And so then what we do in a larger company is we prioritize that, or have a dedicated network in parallel, so that the network storage is not competing with, say, video streaming or whatever. And the thing about that is that then allows you to sync two network devices in two different locations to have as your backup. Back in the day, you wanted to make sure you had a backup, so then you backed up the floppy drives, and then if you had a lot, you backed it up to a tape, and then it turned out that the floppy drives got bigger, and they kept getting bigger until they were, the double high def ones. And then a lot of companies that needed to do backups went to tapes, high-speed tapes, and then the owner has to carry a high-speed tape from one location to another in order to have offsite storage in case of a backup. And so then you've got to remember to rotate the tapes. And if you screw it up and rotate it wrong, you get a double old one offsite instead of the brand new one, and that kind of a thing. And so there's this whole process, and it's very tedious. And the new storage, you want to be able to take advantage of the cloud, which means that my data is safe because it's backed up. Well, that again gets back to the trust we were talking about earlier in another talk. Where if you can't trust the cloud you're on, that one, your data is your data and nobody else is looking at it. And number two, that they're not going to lose your data because they're idiots. And how do you know? I mean, it's like these people with life insurance companies where people had life insurance policies or a pension plan, and then that thing goes up, belly up and bankrupt, and then they pay out pennies on the dollar, and then you've got nothing. Well, the same thing is true for your cloud storage. Now, the advantage for the Western Digital one is you can actually set up Western Digital devices in two different locations and have them sync to each other. However, it's not for the timid. I mean, it's not something that just comes out of the box. Or at least the last time I checked, maybe the new ones do. So that's one of the things that I've been doing a lot of thinking about on how to make that work well for small businesses, for personal people, so that I don't have to put all my private information out on the cloud where just anybody can get at it.
Well, it also increases the space that you can have in terms of terabytes of data, let's say in two locations, versus the gigabytes, and you're paying an arm and a leg for extra space. So
Right.
it actually becomes cost effective at a certain scale.
Oh, very quickly, actually, because when you're only a couple of terabytes, usually you can get those for free. But then as soon as you go over that, suddenly your the price goes right through the roof. One of my experiences is that you can get very cheap 2 gigabyte memory virtual machines out on the internet anymore from a variety of different providers. However, as soon as you need an 8 gig machine, and we're talking the memory, not the hard drive,
Yeah.
It very quickly gets expensive. I mean, it multiplies.
Is that where you have the front end with very little, and you're basically using the, let's say, the cloud machine? I mean, gaming, there's certain gaming companies that are doing that, and there are all kinds of possibilities in terms of video editing and
Oh yeah, and you can do your own thing where you have your own little web server out there, and then you put the software out there on your web server, and then you just access it from any one of your computers by logging into a web page. And if you put it out in the cloud on one of those servers, no big deal. But I keep finding software that needs 8 gigabytes of memory at any point in time. But the cheap servers out there where you can buy 6 of them are 2 gig machines, and you can buy 6 of them for a song. Well, the problem is one of my colleagues was saying, well, can't we just spread it out across those 6? And no, you can't, because it needs to be all in one location.
Yep. So one of the challenges I've run into, it's usually with photos and video. The rest of my data, I could use OneDrive, or I could use the Asus storage free up to a certain number of gigs, or the Google Drive, all this stuff, all these storage solutions for most of my documents. It's perfectly fine. The problem I run into
is the
photos and the videos. And
because the size is start getting bigger.
And this is where the network attached storage would, if I could get all of my devices to sync their photos and videos, and the problem is I just haven't maybe invested the time in doing this, where all of my computers, Mac and PC, and the iPhones and everything, sync the photos and videos and everything to a single location.
Well, they go out
on my network. They go out of their way to make that impossibly
hard to do, and it turns out that the evil Microsoft with their ancient shared NAS type storage is what everybody uses. And then so you know you've got the servers out there, so you still have the NAS storage. Seems to be the similar thing that everybody can get at. And one of the things is that like I said, there's been a couple of providers that have gone out of their way to make that work, and I think that's one of the advantages that the open source community has given, is where these companies have tried to lock everything down to make it proprietary where you can't share it. The open source people have found some way around that where you could. And if it weren't for some of them, you wouldn't have the cloud that you have today, because they never would have given it away. Yeah. So anyway, I think there's some possibilities for that. And
because I think what your solution hinges on in terms of the network attached storage in multiple locations is also the ease of that data being transmitted to the network attached storage device from the constellation of machines that want to access it.
Yes, and also to have a backup that's cost effective. It doesn't require me to spend hours to make a copy of it, nor to physically carry it from one location to another. And I think there's some scenarios where you can actually plant your servers where they both won't get wiped out in a fire and or earthquake, and then sync them up across each other. and away you go. Now the trick is you can't have two sites that have the same amount of activity on them, because of the way
Why not?
well, if you buy a business connection for your sites, then you can do it. But if you're going to have a private connection, your bandwidth coming in can be very high because they want to stream movies to you, but your upload is very low. So as long as one of your sites can actually be a private site that you're just using for backup purposes as an owner, without having to leverage it as a business site, because you can have all of the bandwidth coming in to make the backup, and the little bit of work that you do at home can go back the other way, back to the primary site.
So that's almost perfect then in terms of upload download speeds for the typical connection, where you would have a business location where you do most of your work, and you could do some fraction of that, let's say, from home in the evenings or whatever. And by the time you get into work the next day, overnight, your system is uploaded all that stuff.
Actually, the way you want to set it up is
during your commute.
Trickle charges all day long, so that actually by the time you get home from your commute, it's probably already synced up. And the other thing is, you want to have some software running on your server to do two things. One is to deduplicate your duplicates, and so it finds identical files all over the place. And instead of trying to organize,
drives me nuts.
Well, what it should do, I think, is just make a symbolic link, and have some sort of algorithm to determine which one's the primary. Maybe the folder that's got the most activity in it most recently, and then that folder's a little more important.
Would there be a way for it to flag it so that I know when I'm deleting one of these that I'm not deleting the last one?
No, you make it so that they're just symbolic links. You'll be able to tell it's a symbolic link just by looking at it. You'd know whether it's the real McCoy or a symbolic. So if you want to know where the real McCoy is, the symbolic points at it, and then
that seems problematic to me in terms of, let's say you delete one whole set and it's symbolically linked somewhere else, and now the symbolic link has lost its.
Well, if you delete one that other people are symbolically linking to, yeah, they're goofed.
That's the concern I've got with all that.
Yeah, well, but there's
got to be a way to do that in such a way that it's symbolically linked, but it won't actually delete that copy unless you've deleted every last one of the links.
Quit deleting it if you want to keep it.
I'm trying to clean up my data, so I've just got one, man.
Right. Well, that you would trust the software to do that. It would go through and make sure there's only one copy, and everywhere else there's just a tiny little symbolic link to it. So then what you want to do is, if you find one that's large, you don't delete that one. That's the real one. Put it where you want it. And then the other ones, they just point to it.
There's got to be a way. Like it comes to mind almost like a game of StarCraft, you know, where you warp in your units to a different location. Yeah. I want the symbolic link to have like a little, I make this the real one, and it'll.
Well, you can have some software do that, but if you're going to go in there and do it manually, you're going to mess it up. So you just you have to have software. Back to trust. You have to have something you trust. If you trust it to get rid of all the duplicates, you don't feel the need to go in there and clean them all up by deleting extras, because they're not taking any space. They're just links.
Well, and this is where, wouldn't you want basically your entire file system to be symbolic links, and the data is just basically buried underneath? And even if you delete all the symbolic links, it might still be there.
Well, that's where you have that network attached storage, and where you have an auditing feature built into it, where when you delete stuff or change stuff, it keeps the old copy for a certain period of time, so that you can, I don't know why I thought Apple had announced the end of the time machine, and the time machine is a beautiful thing, because you can go back to any point in time and figure out what's in your history. Something like that that goes through and says, as it's changing, it makes a copy of it. And so then that software, you could say, I want a copy of that folder as of a certain date. And so then it would give that back to you back some period of time. And the only problem is if you're changing a lot of stuff every day, that you would eventually fill up your capacity. But at that point, if you're a business and you want to keep that, it's a matter of how big is your capacity. Just throw another cloud device at it, and now you can double your retention period. Also, you can have different retention periods, a class of retention based on the type of data. So
sort of like a DVR where it saves it until you need the space for some of that content.
Right. And so then that also allows you then to put in some intelligence for the ransomware, because the way the ransomware works is it comes in and encrypts your file, except you would say, well, no, wait a minute, I'm going to keep a backup copy for so many days. So maybe you want to encrypt your files, but you'd still have the backups unless you intentionally went in and said, clear out all the backups. And you'd
think the ransomware would be smart enough to do that at some point.
It wouldn't have access to it because the network attached storage is not where the virus is running. The network attached storage would have to be hardened so that, if the virus got in there, then you're goofed. But yeah, it would have software that would detect.
And then it would have auto-copied itself to the other network attached storage in the other location, and now you're really
right. But that's how you take care of it, is that your network attached storage is its own enclave within your site, and so it's hardened so that it doesn't get automatically updated just because the rest of them did. It's on a different cycle. And even better is have it managed, and you have it managed by somebody and they're monitoring it, and they'll know it's been attacked.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a solution to some of that stuff, and there's a lot of traction there. So anyway, I think we've kind of ground down here on this conversation, but those are some thoughts about storage and how to solve the dilemma. I think that there's a lot of potential there, and I'm not sure how to provide those answers to people, but I think all the parts are there, but they're not all integrated in an engineered way, like one of my other talks that I tried to have, where it's simple enough for any, whether grandma or grandpa, to get into the car and drive off with it. You want it to be that engineered, and we're not there yet. The batteries are not.
Where my 3-year-old could jump into the hover jet and it would take her safely wherever it was that she wanted to go.
And without delivering her to who knows where. And that, and by the way, the 3-year-old versus grandma, sometimes we're talking the same capabilities mentally, because that's just the nature of life, right? And so it depends upon how old grandma is. And
maybe she decided to go visit grandma.
Or how sharp your daughter is. I mean, sometimes they're pretty sharp too. So
she took the hover jet to California?
Yeah, that's right.
But like that in some ways is sort of the dream and the nightmare, that your child could have jumped in this vehicle and gone off to go see grandma 3 hours away in a hover jet, but she would have done it safely because that's sort of how we have everything set up.
Unfortunately, usability and security are on two ends of a spectrum, and so the more usable something is, the less secure it is. And so if you make it too usable, then people can use it stupidly, and that's not secure.
Yeah.
That's true of everything.
So I think that's a good end.